were saved and so on. And that's standard. I mean, you have to divert. You want to make sure that the population doesn't think about what's around them and maybe do something about it. Obviously, that's one audience. But the international scene is, well, that's one part of it, but there's more. I think the imperial element is also significant. The third world has to be taught a lesson. They have to be taught a lesson that if you step on our toes, you don't just get beaten, you get pulverized. And in fact, the administration was kind enough to give us that story in their own words. They leaked, just as the so-called ground war, it was not a war, the ground operation was beginning, they leaked a section of a national security policy policy review from the early days of the Bush administration, so long before this. And it was a section on third world threats. And what it said was something like this. It said, in the case of a much weaker enemy, it is not enough to defeat them. You have to defeat them decisively and rapidly, because anything else would be too embarrassing and might undercut political support. So the trick is you find a much weaker enemy, build them up to be a major, monstrous force, menacing force.
Saddam Hussein's army.
Defeat them, or Noriega, which was done just a year ago with Noriega. Defeat them decisively and rapidly, and that's the only way you can keep political support. And that's a lesson to the third world, but it's also a lesson to the world as a whole. I mean, the United States no longer is the overwhelmingly dominant economic force in the world as it was for many years. It's now just one of three. But in military force, it ranks supreme, and it has every reason to want confrontations in the world shifted to the military arena, because the domain of force is where the United States is dominant, and you play your strong card in any confrontation. U.S. card happens to be force. Furthermore, it's more intricate because the U.S. no longer has the economic base to carry out the traditional role of third world intervention. It therefore has to become, as the business press has been very frank in pointing out, has to become a mercenary state. Others are going to have to pay for these adventures, and one source of payment is petrodollars. One of the major sources of capital in the world is the profits from energy production, and the United States wants to make sure, as it has long wanted to make sure, that those profits are fed primarily to support the U.S. economy and, of course, the economy of its lieutenant in these operations, namely Britain. That goes way back.
What about the standard argument here, though, Noam, that Saddam Hussein really is a bad guy,
yeah, sure
that he did do a terrible thing in invading his neighboring country, Kuwait, that he did subject the Kuwaiti people to terrible tortures, and that he also was probably building up a nuclear arsenal? That these were all, so in many ways there was a justification for this war.
Well, look, all of those things are true, and they were all true on August 1st. On August 1st, when it was true in 1980. In 1980, Saddam Hussein was basically a Russian client. Reagan and Bush and Thatcher recognized him as our kind of guy, and they worked very hard for several years to switch him over to the U.S. side. In 1982, he was taken off the list of terrorist states so that they could then get huge U.S. credits to buy U.S. exports. Became one of the leading U.S. became one of his leading trading partners. By 1987. Iraq was largely a Western, dependent on the West, also for the buildup of its extensive weapons of mass destruction and so on. When he did things like, say, gassing the Kurds in 1988, the Reagan administration intervened to prevent Congress from condemning it in any serious way, let alone to stop sanctions. This went right on to 1990. I mean, in July 1990, Bush intervened again to try to prevent the House Foreign Affairs Committee from condemning Saddam Hussein, or it did impose some sanctions that would interfere with American business. In fact, on August 1st, while they were getting not only warnings, but direct statements from the CIA saying the invasion's coming, on August 1st, the White House authorized new high-technology shipments to Iraq. In the preceding 2 weeks, up to August 1st, they had authorized, according to what's been made public so far, who knows the real story, but what's been made public so far, they authorized almost $5 million worth of high-technology aid.
To go to Iraq.
It went not just to Iraq, it went to the Ministry of Military Industry, it went to the nuclear research plant that was later bombed on the grounds that it was producing military bombs, and to a chemical and to another plant that was bombed on the grounds that it was producing chemical and biological weapons. Now that was 2 weeks before, and it's true that the invasion of Kuwait was a crime, but his record was so sordid that what it added to it is very slight and was of no concern to the United States.
But so this makes no sense. What's the turning point? Why?
The turning point is we stepped on our toes. And that you don't do. I mean, by the standards of the United States and Britain, you can gas your population, you can torture, you can murder, you can set up one of the most brutal tyrannies in the world. That's all fine as long as you're our thug. Yes. But he did something on August 2nd, which is impermissible. He was told, we don't care very much if you rectify border problems, but he took over Kuwait, and that's not allowed. We run the oil business, and when anybody steps on our toes, especially if they're much weaker, then they get not only defeated, but pulverized.